Between 2010 and 2017, Bruce McArthur killed 8 men in the city of Toronto, Canada. Once the murders had taken place, McArthur staged the bodies, photographed them, then dismembered each man, disposing of them on a property where he worked as a landscaper. All but 2 of the missing men were reported to the police. Yet, despite the imploring of families and friends, despite 2 separate task force investigations looking for some of the missing men, it would take investigators nearly a decade to track down a serial killer who had been arrested and detained on 2 separate occasions, convicted on one of those occasions, and banned from Toronto's gay neighborhood called The Village. Using court records, the results of investigative reporting, and the findings of a missing persons review, this episode will take a look at the murders, the missing men, and the missed opportunities that allowed Bruce McArthur to kill without detection. Thank you for joining me for Bruce McArthur, Serial Killing with Ease. Around noon on October 31st, 2001, a few weeks after his 50th birthday, Bruce McArthur followed Mark Henderson into his apartment building, and as they crossed the threshold into the corridor, unprovoked, McArthur pulled out a pipe and began striking Henderson in the back of the head. He hit Henderson again and again before Henderson was able to fend off the attack. Soon after Henderson lost consciousness, when he came to, he called emergency services and was taken to the hospital. He had suffered injuries to his head and his body, needing several stitches and 6 weeks of physiotherapy. Henderson said he knew McArthur from The Village, but avoided him because he didn't like him. McArthur felt some grievance and attacked Henderson to settle some sort of score, either real or imagined. Bruce McArthur left the scene and turned himself into the police, telling them that he didn't remember the incident or why he had attacked Henderson. He told the police he carried the pipe to defend himself from street hustlers who he feared might rob him. McArthur told the police the story of a past sexual relationship with Henderson, which he later retracted. McArthur pled guilty to charges of assault with a weapon and assault causing bodily harm. On April 11, 2003, McArthur received a conditional sentence of 729 days, meaning he didn't serve any jail time. Instead, he was sentenced to 1 year of house arrest, followed by 6 months of house curfew, 3 years of probation, and a 2-year ban from the gay village. The court seemed to believe McArthur's defense that his behavior had been due to a combination of seizure medication and the use of amyl nitrate. In sentencing, the judge told McArthur that he seemed like a nice guy who wouldn't get himself into any more trouble. As I said, McArthur was barred from the village except for work and medical appointments. He also had to submit his DNA to a database and was compelled to undertake psychiatric counseling and anger management. According to those involved in law enforcement, this list of conditions was uncommon, suggesting to them that the judge might have had some real concern about McArthur's degree of threat. I see it a bit differently. I think the judge saw someone he could relate to and wanted to give McArthur the best chance for success. What stands out to me is, with the level of involvement from the system of reform and monitoring, it didn't work, nor did any of its participants seem to be able to accurately assess the potential for future risk. Skandaraj Navaratnam is believed to be McArthur's first victim. The 40-year-old had moved to Canada from Sri Lanka in the 1990s as a refugee and settled into life in the village. He had been described as someone who was very jovial and social and always ready to help out his friends. Navaratnam disappeared on or about September 6, 2010, abandoning a new puppy in his apartment. His friends called the police to report him missing. Police think this time frame is when Navaratnam was killed. A friend of Navaratnam said his disappearance was like an alien abduction. One minute he was hanging out at the popular Zippers bar, and in the next moment, Navaratnam was gone. In searching McArthur's van, they found a piece of leather lacing, hand-woven leather, with Navaratnam's DNA on it. Police also found a silver bracelet belonging to Mr. Navaratnam. in McArthur's bedroom during their investigation. Neville Rotnam had known McArthur since the early 2000s, and they had dated off and on. I'll just add here that unlike most serial killers, Bruce McArthur had some sort of relationship with almost all of his victims, which adheres to the norms when it comes to murders in general, but it's something that's unusual when it comes to serial killers. On December 29, 2010, 42-year-old Abdul Bashir Fayazi was reported missing by his wife. Fayazi was a closeted married man and father of two, like Avner Rotnam, who seemed to just disappear. His car was found abandoned in a residential area of Toronto. The police thought and told the family that perhaps Fayazi had just quote-unquote vacated his life, an expression police use for those who walk away from their lives. According to the Statement of Facts, which is a document prepared at the time of sentencing, Fayazi was killed on or around the same day he went missing. Fayazi lived a divided life in the Toronto suburb of Brampton, where he lived with his wife and children, spending his social life in the gay village of downtown Toronto. His family reported him missing, but they had no idea of his ties to the village, so his disappearance flew under the radar of Toronto's LGBTQ community. Fayazi's car was found abandoned near a home that McArthur was house-sitting at the time of Fayazi's disappearance. During McArthur's sentencing hearing, Fayazi's wife said that his daughters, who were aged 6 and 10 when their father disappeared, often cry for their father. She said she's still struggling to support the family. In mid-October of 2012, 58-year-old Majid Hamid Kayhan was reported missing by his son. Friends said Kayhan had known McArthur previously and may have had a sexual relationship with him. In the Statement of Facts, Mr. Kayhan's murder was sexual in nature, and that his body had been staged and photographed after his death. Police believe Kayhan was murdered on or around October 18th of 2012. Like Fayazi, Kayhan was believed to have led two separate lives, one with his family and one in the village. Kayhan was the youngest of many siblings. He had a wife and children, and he also frequented many of the bars in the village and kept an apartment in the area. McArthur told police that he had employed Kayhan as a landscaper helper and claimed that he had a brief sexual relationship with him. After the report of Kayhan's disappearance, Toronto police launched Project Houston, as in Houston, we have a problem, a task force to investigate the disappearance of Neville Rotnam, Fayazi, and Kayhan, the men who had disappeared between 2010 and 2012. On November 11, 2013, Bruce McArthur was interviewed by the police as a part of Project Houston because an analysis of Neville Rotnam and Fayazi's belongings showed that they knew him. In the interview, McArthur told investigators he knew Neville Rotnam from a group he would socialize with at a Toronto bar called the Black Eagle, but he denied having a sexual relationship with Neville Rotnam. If the police had checked with Neville Rotnam's friends, they would have verified that Bruce McArthur did indeed have a relationship, an intimate relationship with Neville Rotnam that they knew about. What's truly extraordinary about this interview with Bruce McArthur was that he wasn't being interviewed as a suspect. He was being interviewed as a witness in the missing persons cases, in spite of the fact that he had connections to two of the missing men and he had a history of assault. In a statement read to the court at the trial, Mr. Kayhan's brother said, "I still have not comprehended how this crime happened. It has consumed the majority of my thoughts." 50-year-old Soroush Mahmoudi was a refugee from Iran and reported missing by his wife. Police believe Mahmoudi was killed on or about August 15, 2015. Like Mr. Kayhan, Mr. Mahmoudi's murder was sexual in nature. His body was staged and photographed. There is evidence that a ligature was used in the murder. Police found a fur coat in Bruce McArthur's van, and that had Mahmoudi's DNA on it. This same coat was used in the staging of several of McArthur's victims. In a statement to the court, Mahmoudi's wife called him her soulmate and said that she had been overwhelmed by grief at his brutal slaying. On or about June 6, 2016, police have said it is not clear how 37-year-old Karushna Kumar Kanagaratnam met Bruce McArthur. Mr. Kanagaratnam came to Canada on a ship carrying 500 asylum seekers after a 6-week journey at sea. Mr. Kanagaratnam's refugee status was denied and he was ordered to be deported. Though his family searched for him on Facebook and social media, they didn't report him missing because they assumed that he was in hiding. Like the other victims, Mr. Kanagaratnam's body had been staged. There was evidence that a ligature had been used. 47-year-old Dean Lizowick is believed to have been killed sometime around April 23, 2016. Evidence of the use of a ligature was present, and staging of the body was also present. McArthur kept some of Lizowick's jewelry, which police found in McArthur's apartment. According to the police, Lizowick was never reported missing, due in large part to Lizowick's occasional bouts with homelessness. In a statement read in court, his daughter said, "I will always have to live with knowing that I will never have a relationship with my father." On June 20th, 2016, in the middle of his killing spree, Bruce McArthur was arrested. During a sex hookup, the victim said McArthur started to choke him while in the back of McArthur's red van. The man was able to fight McArthur off and told him that he was going to call the police. McArthur reportedly drove to the police station, as he had done in the Henderson incident, where he told police officers that they were going to get a call about a sexual assault, that it wasn't true, and that the sex was all consensual. McArthur was placed under arrest and questioned further. After the questioning, a decision was made to let McArthur go. It's important to know that after McArthur had served his 2003 conviction, he petitioned the court to have his records expunged, and they were. But as it's been noted by others, if the police had checked Bruce McArthur's police record, they would have found a notation about that arrest and conviction. When the other murders came to light, the detective who had questioned McArthur was fired. The detective's lawyer released this statement: "Detective Gauthier conducted a proper investigation and fully documented the arrest of McArthur so that the information was available to all other investigators." I have to say, it does seem to me that the firing of Detective Gauthier does feel a little bit like scapegoating. In his book, Missing from the Village, Jason Ling points out the budget and staff for missing person searches was dwarfed by the budget and manpower used for busting up gay cruising activities. In this 2016 period of disappearances, and as it turns out, murders, the Toronto police mounted a raid of parks and cruising spots, arresting 89 men who were all set to be prosecuted until the gay community came together protesting. After a year, arrest charges were finally dropped. 44-year-old Selim Esen was originally from Turkey and was reported missing on April 14, 2017. Like the others, his murder was sexual in nature with signs of ligature use. In this case, ropes were used to bind and confine Mr. Esen. Essen's body was staged after the murder and photographed. Police found DNA evidence in McArthur's van and Mr. Essen's notebook in McArthur's apartment. Esen had struggled in the past with substance abuse, but his friends said Esen had reached a turning point and hoped to help others in their recovery. 49-year-old Andrew Kinsman disappeared on June 26, 2017. Like the others, a ligature and rope were used to confine Mr. Kinsman. According to his friends and police, Kinsman and McArthur had known one another for years and were involved sexually. Police found the entry, Bruce, on Kinsman's diary on the date of June 26, 2016. Police believe this was the day that Mr. Kinsman was murdered. Andrew Kinsman's friends rallied together in the search for him, and it was this level of visibility that seemed to spur investigators back into action. And I have to say, once they did spring into action, they did an amazing job of surveillance and data collection, albeit 7 or 8 years and lives too late. It's true that Mr. Kinsman's connection to the community and his work as a gay rights activist meant that he had a larger profile than the others. But it also can't be ignored that he was white, not an immigrant, and he didn't have a history of sex work or drug addiction. So the question is, did these things make a difference in the attention that his disappearance created? I think it did. On December 5th, 2017, like something out of a police thriller, the police obtained a general warrant to enter McArthur's apartment to clone data from any digital devices and storage media and search for any items directly linked to Mr. Kinsman. As they worked away at collecting evidence, the word came that McArthur was on his way back to his apartment. The team barely made it out of the apartment in time. 2 days later, on December 7th, the police returned to McArthur's apartment to copy the computer and hard drives in his bedroom. Investigators were in the apartment for just more than an hour before they were alerted through surveillance that McArthur was on his way home. During this search, police took DNA swabs of an orange stain on one of McArthur's pillows. They also collected a metal bar wrapped with tape. They found Post-it notes with website account names and passwords. Soon after the search, investigators found over 100 pictures of Kinsman in what they copied from McArthur's computer, some dating back as far as 2007. On January 18, 2018, a man who called himself John met McArthur on the website Growler. John and McArthur had met up a few times, but on this occasion, McArthur invited him over to his apartment, asking did anyone know about their meetup. John assured him that it was a secret. Once in his apartment, McArthur tied John to his bed and tried to tape his mouth shut. At this time, McArthur was under constant police surveillance, and when the officers saw the man go into his apartment, they rushed into the apartment to arrest McArthur. When they did, police found John in McArthur's bedroom, tied to the bed with a bag over his head. Chillingly, forensic analysis later revealed that Bruce McArthur had created an electronic folder of photos of John, alongside folders he kept of the 8 men he had killed. McArthur was charged with first-degree murder in the deaths of Essen and Kinsman, even though the bodies hadn't been found yet. In late January, after searching over 30 properties where McArthur might have worked, police found 2 planters on the Mallory Crescent property where McArthur stored his equipment. In these planters, they found the skeletal remains of at least 3 people. Later, the police would find more remains near the north side of the Mallory Crescent property. Police recovered the remains of 7 men killed by Bruce McArthur in what they described as a compost pile of leaves, branches, and human remains. Searching McArthur's apartment, investigators found evidence that McArthur would shave many of his victims, keeping their hair in Ziploc bags. Among other evidence recovered was the fur coat McArthur used in staging. Often the victims would be photographed with an unlit cigar in their mouths. On January 29, 2019, Bruce McArthur pled guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder and was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. Bruce McArthur is the most prolific known serial killer to have been active in Toronto, and the oldest known serial killer in Canada. The Crown Prosecution Service wanted a 50-year sentence without parole. In sentencing McArthur, the judge said, "There's a fine line between retribution, which is an appropriate sentencing principle, and vengeance." He went on, "If the accused either had a trial or would have been a younger man, I would have had no hesitation accepting the Crown's able argument to impose consecutive sentencing terms." Needless to say, many of the families were not happy with this sentence. That many of them wanted Bruce McArthur to get 8 life sentences without parole. The police held a now famous press conference where the chief of police, when questioned, denied that there were any failures to link McArthur to the victims in a way that would have led to his arrest. The chief told the press McArthur had friends and family everywhere. He was Santa Claus, and the people that knew him best had no idea that he was capable of murder. The chief said, "Our role is to follow the evidence, and there wasn't enough here. Nobody was coming to us with anything. Nobody. That last comment sent up a red flare of rage throughout the gay community. After all, the community had been telling the police about people going missing in the village, and the police had dismissed all of their concerns. After McArthur's plea and sentence, there was a review of Toronto's missing person investigation procedures, which were found to be lacking in many areas. Many of these recommendations have been taken on board, and only time will tell whether they're effective or enough. For me, the failures in this investigation seem clearly, if not entirely, connected to the Toronto Police Force's horrendous past relationship with the LGBTQ community as late as 2016, as Bruce McArthur cut a path of serial murder through that community. A history of beatings and raids and over-the-top arrests that have been the hallmark of policing of the gay community in Toronto since forever. Like in the Stephen Port case, blinders have become more complicated over the years. Outright homophobia, showing up at clubs and arresting people, bashing their heads in while you take them into the station, isn't quite as attractive or doable as it was even 20 years ago. But when combined with problems police face in every major city around the world, biases become a little more clear, along with an unwillingness, perhaps, to listen to the community when it tells you that men or people are going missing. Serial killers are known for choosing victims who no one will miss, and in some ways, Bruce McArthur chose a perfect storm to kill in. He also made a miscalculation, but he did choose men who were struggling, some of them with their immigration status, men who battled substance addiction, and the one thing unique to the LGBTQ community, the closet. Many of McArthur's victims were closeted men whose families knew nothing about their lives in the village until they disappeared and had been murdered. Surely McArthur was aware of the silence of the closet and exploited it. One of the heartbreaking aspects of these murders is the fact that a closeted life could make your life so small it could be snuffed out in utter silence. But back to the police. Like the rest of society, the police cannot have a depth of vision without confronting their past. Understanding how that past informs the present should make it easier to recognize bias when it rears its ugly little head. Today, like some racial bias, homophobia is hiding in the idea of the perfect victim, making any victim with a flawed, imperfect history less worthy of the time and money it takes to solve these sorts of crimes. Without facing that terrible homophobic past, how can the Toronto police ever truly move forward? My thoughts, as I'm sure yours do, go out to all the families and friends who lost loved ones. I hope that these traumas don't just happen in a vacuum and that something is learned and used. Even though it isn't an idea always acted on, I believe every life has value, and not treating victims of violent crime as if they all matter devalues all of us and puts every one of us at risk. If you haven't watched part 1 of this 2-part series, please check out the episode on Stephen Port. Also, please subscribe and like the video. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.